Hey folks, my name is Luca Tischler. I'm a motion graphic designer, compositor, currently living in Barcelona. In spare time, I'm also a video director and editor. I have to tell you that this is my first tutorial for ADOBE Plus, so please bear with me. As you can see, we'll be doing something different today. I know a lot of you guys have heard about node-based systems which are commonly used for compositing, such as Nuke, Shake, Combustion, and of course the one that I'll be focusing on, Fusion from Ion. You may be accustomed to a linear editing program such as Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere, or a timeline-based aspect program such as Adobe After Effects or Apple's Motion. These softwares are timeline-based, meaning that various clips and effects are arranged in time order on a timeline where the effecting and compositing happens. So, node-based compositing demands different thinking. Node-based compositing represents a composition as a tree graph, linking media, objects and effects in a procedural map, laying the progression from source to final output. A good way to look at the difference between a timeline-based system such as After Effects and a node-based system such as Fusion is to compare a hardware outline to an idea tree. You can write a paper either way and both will be strong. As long as you know what you're doing and how your ideas connect to one another. But the best way to understand this kind of compositing is to just dive into it and start exploring it. So let's get started. Fusion's workflow consists of menu system, left and right viewport, parameter section, node-based area window, and a timeline. You can expand your workflow with another viewport, which can be accessed in Window, New View, and it pops up. So you can drag it to your second monitor. In Node window, there are also tabs for console, in which you can read some tips and error messages. In timeline, you can see duration of your images, sequences and notes, and all the keyframes which you can edit. Spline tab is like graph editor in After Effects, but is way more powerful. You'll see that later. Timeline is positioned down below. By default, composition is 1000 frames long, but you can set up the length in this field. We'll set it on 50 frames. Field above represents the current frame. You can set in and out point here and here, but you can also set it up by dragging this little triangle right, this is the out point, and left the in point. And you can also move the whole preview right and left. There is also a global range indicator which you can zoom in the timeline. Next, there is a render button, but I'll explain it a bit later. There are also buttons for go to in point, go to out point, move one frame back, move one frame forward, play it forward, play it backward, and of course the stop button, which appears when you're playing the preview. There are also buttons for loop, ping pong, and off. The button for sound, and here are the quality of preview buttons. This is high quality, the motion blur toggler, proxy, and auto proxy buttons. This little button is for updating tools, but we'll talk about this later or in other tutorial. Below timeline, there is a status bar with all kinds of informations. Now I'd like to show you where you can set up project preferences. Click File and choose Preferences. We'll take a look at globals and the new composition preferences. There are a lot of preferences, but for now I'll just focus on frame format and general. Here we can choose our default format. We have 5K Emax, 4K, 2K, HDTV, 720p, 180p, PAL, NTSC, 69dB, and so on. You can also type in your own values for width and height, for frame rate, film size, and aspect ratio. So when you set up those parameters, every new composition will open with those settings. In General Preferences, you can set up parameters for your tablet, and of course you can also set up autosave. And now let's take a look at the composition settings. As you can see, my default settings are set on 720p with 25 frames per second. Okay, let's go take a look at our basic nodes. We import them by going to Tools, and we can also undock this little panel. And you can take a look of all those nodes. And you can also right click, add tool, and let's, for example, in Composite you have dissolve, merge, everything for color correction, the blurs and the glows, and this one is huge, the 3D, yeah, Fusion has a 3D. We'll take a look at this some other time. Creator for background, fast noise, the text, the pixels, fog, depth blur, some other effects, highlight, TV, trails, film effects, some filters, flows, your own fuses, inputs, outputs, loader, saver, macros, mask. You have mate, chroma keyer, luma keyer, mate control, and all other tools or nodes. For importing a file, you have to select load node, which is positioned right here. You can click on an icon, or if you prefer, just click on it and drag it into a node window. Select your image or image sequence and nothing happens. But when you hover over the node, you can notice those two little black dots. If you press the first one, your image will appear on this viewport. If you deselect it, it will be gone. And also as this one, the second viewport. If you have the third window opened, there is also the third little black dot. And of course you can also drag and drop the node into a viewport. Moving an image and zooming in and out is a little bit different. To move your image, click your middle mouse button and move the image. If you want to zoom in and out, you can either click middle mouse button, hold it, then click left mouse button and drag left and right. You can also hold middle mouse button and just click left to zoom and right to zoom out. You can also zoom in by pressing plus button on your numpad and zoom out by pressing minus button. You can also select the size over here or just press fit button. In order to render out an image sequence or of course your composite, select this node, it's called Saver, and drag it out into a node window. It will ask you to tell him where do you want to save your image sequence or video, but we're not done yet. We have to tell this little fella what exactly we want to export. So we connect this loader by pressing this red square and drag it into an input of Saver. Now with the Saver node selected, go to Preferences of Saver, where you can set up all the parameters. You can choose the path, you can choose the output format, TIFF files, Targa files, AV file, JPEG files, and so on. The process mode, save frames, audio if you have it, you can also offset it, the export mode, the legal, the video type, and the format. You can also choose save alpha or if you want to compress it, click this little button. So now you can render your image sequence by pressing this green render button. If you're ready for your final render, just push start render. But if you just want to make a preview or draft, press preview here and set the parameters that you wish. You can toggle motion blur, you can do step frame, you can do a half size, third, quarter, or even custom size. And here you can also type in frame range. And when you're ready, just press start render. Now let's make our first composite. Let's delete this. Click and drag the background node and drag it to a node window. Then select text node. Drag and drop it into the node window. We have to type something into our text node, so let's type something. Here we can pick the size of a font and the font itself. You also have write on effect, which is positioned right here. We'll take a look at this a bit later. Right now nothing happens, but if you want to merge those two nodes, we need the most important node here in Fusion. It's called merge. Let's drag and drop it into our node window. So let's connect those two, the background and the text. Press this little red square and put it into an input, and also this one into another input. It's very important which input you select. The yellow one represents the background and the green one represents the foreground. So let's drag and drop the merge node into our viewport. Let's select the background node and let's take a look what can we do with it. Of course we can set up the color. We can pick it up from this window. Or of course we can set it up by dragging the values left and right and choose your own custom color. The alpha is over here. We can also select our gradient. Here is gradient from left to right. Here's from up to bottom. Here we have 4 color gradient and our custom gradient. For this one I will pick radial gradient. By dragging this point in line, you move the center, and with other you control the size of your gradient. And for this one I will change the values over here and maybe select the grayish and not so grayish. Let's also change the color of our text in shading. Pick the color that you want. So let's try to animate our text. We'll take a look at the write on effect. Go to frame 0 and push this little fella to the beginning. Click animate. Go to frame 40 and move this side to the end. Right click, set key, and we have our first animation. If you push play, it will only play in this from in point to out point. Let's press stop, expand our in and out point and play it. It's not much, but it's the beginning. Let's stop it. So let's take a look what happens in those tabs. In the timeline you can of course see, you can zoom in and out like in viewport. So that's middle mouse button, hold it, click left mouse button and drag left to right for zoom in, for zoom out. And if you click here on plus button, you will see our keyframes, start and end. You can move them if you want to over here like this. Just hold it and drag it, but I really recommend that you go to the spline editor and select your keyframes over here, and of course you move with the middle mouse button, zoom in and out by middle mouse button and left mouse button, and drag it left and right. You can also zoom in and out over here. Sometimes it's way easier. So let's add ease in and ease out to those keyframes. Select both keyframes, and up here there are buttons that can make your life a bit easier. So click smooth button and voila. And of course we can edit our splines the way we want to. So by clicking this button, your animation will return to previous state, to linear. And you can of course also check the other buttons. Let's smooth this out and let's loop it. Here's a button for loop. So this thing will loop over and over again. But since we only have 50 frames, it will only loop until 50. Let's return to node window and take a look at merge node. Like I said before, it has two inputs, background and foreground. And you can sort of blending mode over here. It's called apply mode. But I guess you are already familiar with these from After Effects. Screen, dissolve, multiply, overlay, and so on. You can move your foreground by clicking this square in viewport, or click and drag like this, or click and drag the arrows for up and down, left and right. You can also rotate it by holding this circle and drag it around. Of course you can set up your own values in those fields for center and for angle. So if you want to animate those values, just position your cursor to, I don't know, to a frame 10. Then right click animate to center, and to angle, right click animate. This is the way you animate everything. I mean everything. So here's our first keyframe on the 10th frame. Let's move on our, I don't know, 50th frame, and let's drag the center, I don't know, over here, and angle like this. Okay. And now we have an animation. It's not an artwork, but those are the basics. Of course, transparency of foreground can be set here. It's called blend. Let's animate this one. Let's make it, let's drop it to 0. Right click, animate, go to frame 30 and push the blend to 1. It adds a keyframe automatically. Wow, that's pretty. So let's come here to the spline and let's add ease in and ease out to all our keyframes. Just drag and select all our keyframes, push the smooth button, and here we go. It's nice and smooth. Wow. So let's take a look at one more node. It's called blur. Just click it, drag and drop. And now, of course, we have to connect this text to be blurry and this output to this input. So what are we gonna do? We can either select this line and connect it to this triangle input, and from output we have to connect foreground. Right now nothing happens because we have the opacity on 0, but let's go on frame 24 and let's blur it out. Blur size, of course you can also animate it, but this time we won't do it. It's by default it's set on the Gaussian blur, or is it Gaussian? Gaussian blur. Yeah. And of course we can also push the blend button up and down until we are satisfied completely. But we can also, let's delete this node by pressing delete button. And once again, let's go click, drag and drop this node. You can also push this node in between, so you don't have to manually connect all the inputs and outputs. You can click on it, drag it, and hold the shift button and place it in the center. As you can see, something happens with our line over here. Just drop the mouse and here we go. It's inside. So let's take a look at one more node. It's called transform. Click, drag and drop it over here. And sometimes you really have to be careful where you put your nodes, because if we put it here, it will also animate the blur. Well, if we put it over here, okay, so let's shift and drag it inside. What happens? We animate everything, including blur. But if we drag it over here, we just influence the text tool. We don't influence the blur tool. As you can see, we can animate size, we can animate aspects, we can animate, of course, the center, angle. We can flip it horizontally, vertically. And if you want to resize something, let's say you have an image, I don't know, 800 by 600, and well, let's make it. Let's take the background, go to image, and for width let's type 800, and for height 600. Drag and drop, 800 by 600. And you have a background that is 128 times 720. Let's delete all those guys. And let's merge those two. We'll put the bigger background to our background and our smaller background to foreground. Let's see what we got. Exactly. So with the resize tool, let's click, drag and drop, click on it, press shift and insert it. What happens? It automatically goes to 128 times 720 because it's the global default of a composition. But we can resize it to, I don't know, to whatever we want. But you have to be careful because if you have a picture in an aspect ratio, you have to be careful so it doesn't, so it's not, so that it keeps the aspect ratio. So let's click here, keep frame aspect, and voila, it will automatically raise the width and the height. Let's reset size. There we go. If we want to, I don't know, make a quick animation, and let's rotate it. Let's animate rotation and the size. Let's drop our size to 0, right click animate, and angle to, I don't know, minus 180 degrees. Right click, animate. Oh, we're at frame 24, so let's go to our null frame, go to spline, pick our keyframes and move them with arrow keys left or right, whatever you want to do, but in this case we'll go to frame 0 by clicking left arrow. Go to flow and go to frame 30, select size 1 and angle, I don't know, 360. It automatically updates, it automatically adds the keyframes. So let's take a look. Wow, amazing. Okay, so that's it for now. Oh, let me show you just one more thing, I promise. I guess you're wondering, what is this little thingy over here? The kind of purplish, bluish triangle. This is for masking. If you want to mask something out, just go over here. You can, of course, pick a polyline mask, but for now we'll just pick up the rectangle mask tool, click on it, and it immediately adds the mask. Or let's pick this one, ellipse mask. So as you noticed, if we don't have anything selected, it just drop into the node window. But let's delete this one. But if you have something selected and press the mask tool, it will automatically connect it to this one, to this node. And of course we can size it up vertically, horizontally, and we can of course move mask around. We can of course soft edge, manually correct width and height, and an angle if we want to. And this is of course pretty self-explanatory border width. And the level is the opacity. Great. So I think I'm gonna stop at this moment. I think you have enough info for the beginning, for basic animation. And next time I will show you some more nodes and some more creative workflows. Okay, until then, my name is Luca Tisler. Bye bye.